All right, everybody, we are back here on Unpacking the Backpack. It's very, very stormy here in the Houston area today. Well, it actually has been all week. But rain's not a bad thing, but it is a great day to record my raw, unedited podcast, which seems to be getting some traction. I've been trying to be very consistent with it every 2 weeks. And, I enjoy doing it. And that's that. So, I hope everyone's having a great June. But let's dive in. And I really want to discuss feedback. Here's the thing, everybody. Everybody says they want feedback. But are the people asking for feedback actually open to it? That's the challenge. But let's kind of state something we all agree on. Everyone needs feedback in order to improve. You would be hard-pressed to identify any profession where it is an essential component to success. I've written in my books and on my blog that there is nothing more vital to our professional roles than good feedback that paints a picture not only of what we are doing well, but areas where we can either become much better or outright improve. It helps us to develop both goals and objectives that guide our work in our respective roles. For the most part, I really believe that everyone wants good feedback so they can become better. And when we look at the research supports and illustrates how feedback positively impacts performance. For example, researchers have found that professionals receiving detailed feedback on a monthly basis outperformed all other groups involved in this one study that John Windust provided. Those receiving detailed monthly feedback improved performance on their key compliant measure by an impressive 46% relative to the control group over the course of the study. And I will link the research that John Windust cited for this little piece that I just shared. But it's important to make the distinction between feedback and criticism. Feedback is information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task, etc., used as a basis for improvement. Criticism, on the other hand, is the expression of disapproval of someone or something based on perceived faults or mistakes. With growth being the end goal, it is important that feedback is delivered in a way that moves others to reflect on their work and take necessary steps to get better. But should feedback even be delivered? I am under the impression or belief that feedback should be facilitated. So when we think about feedback, it's not about the person who's giving it. It's all about the person who is receiving the feedback. And what I mean by this is that we have to ensure that the way in which it is articulated resonates with the person who is receiving it, whether it's a colleague, someone that we're evaluating, or even our students. When we think about feedback, I shared this kind of this tweet many, many years ago. Feedback stings when it is not, one, delivered with sincerity, two, grounded in practicality, and three, given in a timely manner. Yes, feedback stings if it's not sincere, if it's not practical, and if it's not timely. Those elements emphasize the fact that we need to emphasize the who just as much as the what when it's time to provide meaningful feedback for growth. So, as you're thinking about feedback in your role, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, parent, organizational leader, here are 5 components to consider in order for the process to be beneficial to both you who are delivering it or facilitating it and the person that's receiving it. First and foremost, positive delivery. How you deliver any type of feedback will determine whether or not it is acted upon. The words that are used, as well as body language, can have an impact on how the message is received. Feedback shouldn't just focus on areas of improvement. Consider integrating a few admirable elements that you observed to tie this into a much broader plan for growth. Reinforcing good work and practice helps in establishing a trusting relationship that will strengthen the feedback loop over time. Positive delivery also paves the way for a recipient to respond or ask questions to what you have said, creating a positive feedback loop. And isn't that what we want? A positive feedback loop. Next, feedback has to be practical and specific. The goal of feedback is to help someone right away. It should be focused on strategies that can be implemented immediately to help improve professional practice or learning. When I conducted post-conferences with my teachers, I always integrated connections to research that supported my recommendations. Yes, during the summer, that's what I did. I created not an artifact library. I created a comment library related to aspects of feedback, all connected to research. This simple strategy went a long way to illustrate that feedback was not only practical, but also proven to have an impact. Aligning to learning criteria, standards, skills, or competencies can provide the specificity that many people yearn for when it comes to feedback. Next, feedback has to be timely. If the main goal is to use feedback as a catalyst for improvement, then why delay it? This is one of the reasons why I don't really like final exams. Students rarely receive good feedback that informs their learning, as they are typically given these exams at the end of the school year, and they're then graded up until the last minute. Delaying feedback allows small problems to potentially fester into larger ones. The bottom line is that the more time that goes by, the feedback that could have really made an impact will not be valued as much, if at all. If you're doing learning walks, if you're doing observations, think about what is going to be the turnaround time. In my role now as a coach, if I spend all day with a district or a building or a leader, they receive feedback from me, 2,000 to 5,000 words within 24 hours. Why? Because it's got to be timely. It's got to be practical, specific. And, what I learned was when I was a principal, when I did unannounced observations, my teachers had the post-conference within 24 hours. And it went a long way to helping them get that information that they needed to improve, but also validation. Next, feedback has to be consistent. You have to develop a sense of consistency when providing feedback. If delivery of feedback is grounded in the first 3 points, when we go back and we think about positive delivery, practical, specific, timeliness, then consistency creates a culture committed to support, growth, empathy, and relationship building. This reason alone, is what drove our learning walk process in my former school. Not only did we get into classrooms every day as administrators, but we also made the point to always provide non-evaluative feedback that helped to prepare our teachers for their numerous unannounced observations down the road. The use of student portfolios is another great strategy to provide consistent feedback aligned to standards and learning targets. More feedback is always better than less. And, going back to the consistency piece, we put schedules in place and we kind of had norms as a leadership team that we're going to do 5 walks a day, each of us. That equated to 100 walks a week, 400 a month. And not only did we have conversations face to face with our teachers, but we were able to consistently provide the walkthrough data and feedback during faculty meetings so that we could all celebrate in shared success, but also look for trends without signaling anyone out as to where we could grow. Finally, when it comes to feedback, we got to use the right medium. Technology has impacted the way in which feedback's delivered. Even though it's easy to shoot off an email or text, these pathways might not always be the most effective, depending on the situation or recipient. So much can get lost in translation when there's no eye contact, hearing of voices, or observations of body language. I'm a huge proponent that there is no replacement for face-to-face communication when it comes to someone's performance. Phone calls, live video, or establishing a time to meet can go a long way to ensuring that the message has its intended impact. Pause and think about the feedback you are going to give and the best medium to facilitate the conversation. And that leads to this, the feedback process matters. It really matters if we want it to influence. And I think about feedback as consider this, try this, think about this. Why does process matter? Nobody likes to be just talked at, regardless of the age group of the person being spoken to. Even though, there are most certainly cases that necessitate this, context matters. Lately I've been thinking about how we provide feedback to our learners, colleagues, and those who we supervise. And maybe give is the wrong word to use. The prevailing notion is that one person speaks while the other or others listens intently and reflects on the advice given. Herein lies one of the greatest misconceptions with an effective feedback loop. In many cases, feedback is seen as something that is given to another person. It becomes even more complicated when it is viewed as something that must be delivered. And this goes back to what I was speaking about at the beginning of this podcast. Delivering feedback. We deliver groceries. We get them. And it doesn't mean that it's having a resounding effect on changing the way we think or do things. When there is a focus on delivery, we run the risk of focusing more on what is said as opposed to a process that fosters reflection and ultimately questions from the receiver. Often we settle on what the feedback is in terms of what people have done well or not through our own lens. So much time is then given to mapping out what the feedback is that we want to share with the other person, that it becomes more about us than the person or people we are trying to help. When done this way, it can be construed as criticism as opposed to a catalyst for growth. If the purpose is for others to grow, then a mentality of delivering the message or advice has to be rethought. Feedback should be a dialogue, not a monologue. A conversational approach can lead to high value and actual changes to practice. So here are some specific reasons why the conversation is such an integral part of the feedback loop. The receiver sees that it's more about him or her than the giver. It imparts a greater sense of trust on behalf of the receiver, resulting in a more powerful relationship with the giver or the facilitator. It creates a space for open reflection based on what was shared. it opens the door for discussion on action steps to be taken. It provides the receiver with an opportunity to present his or her own perspective on the feedback that's given. And this can result in the sharing of evidence or more context that the giver might not have been aware of when initially providing the feedback. A conversational approach can motivate people to seek out feedback, and research suggests that asking for it can help organizations tilt culture toward continuous improvement. You know, the one thing that I now do, and I did this as a principal, and I do it now as a coach, is when I visit classrooms, and I visit thousands of classrooms every year, and I love getting to classrooms, rolling up my sleeves, taking in administrators, working on calibration, inter-rater reliability. But recently, I felt that I could do a better job modeling. And what we do now, my team and I, is we'll go in with administrators and observe a teacher for 20 minutes. And then we will model the feedback conversation for the principal, for central office. And what we'll do is we'll go through kind of some generic questions like, what do you think went well and why? What would you have improved if you could do it all again? And the idea here is to ask some open-ended questions to lead the teacher or other instructional staff to their own analysis of what the feedback would be. And what's great about using questions is it does a lot, it addresses a lot of those elements I spoke about before. It really becomes more about a sincere approach. It's a conversation. It really leads to practical opportunities to grow. And what we've learned from this process is the feedback that we've received now is that teachers and administrators, they really, really appreciate the way that the conversation is really the foundation for the feedback. And it really opens them up to kind of their own sort of light bulb moments or ahas as to, yeah, you know what, maybe I could have used more closure. Maybe I could have bumped up the level of thinking. But when you think about feedback and facilitating it, consider developing a set of questions, whether you're a teacher to provide feedback to your students, or if you're an administrator for your teachers. Because the point here is, facilitating feedback in the form of a monologue, or maybe that's delivering it. When we deliver, it's a monologue. We're talking at people. That's an outdated process that can be improved, whether you're working with kids or adults. Instead of preparing how you're going to deliver the message, think about creating the conditions where the receiver will value the recommendations. A conversation that incorporates questioning and the art of listening will go a long way to creating a culture where feedback is not only acted upon, but asked for regularly. It goes without saying that prior to facilitating any type of feedback, be sure your information is accurate and that the means of having that dialogue reeks of sincerity. Sometimes criticism is disguised as feedback, and we want to make sure that we're not doing that. So as you think about how you provide feedback, reflect on where have you found success and what components of good feedback would you add to the conversation that I shared here today. Everybody, I want to thank you, as always, for joining me here on Unpacking the Backpack. And if you want to dive more into the research and examples of feedback, I go into detail on both those elements in several books: Digital Leadership, Second Edition, Disruptive Thinking in Our Classrooms, and Personalize, which can all be found on Amazon. And if you want to learn more about the work that we do through my consultancy, Aspire Change EDU, and how we really provide those feedback reports to drive growth, hey, shoot me an email, find me on social media, and we could set up a Zoom, have a conversation, and I could show you what it actually looks like. Everybody, as always, keep making a difference. And we'll see you here next time on Unpacking the Backpack.